So today, because this is a public lecture, I'm going to do my best actually to abstract a little bit away from the details, but I'm very happy in the reception to talk about any of the scientific details behind what I'm talking about today. And today I'm really going to start with a story. And this story is actually a true story of an email that I received from a man a number of years ago, right after I had written an opinion piece in the New York Times. And he had been a lawyer in Rhodesia. This was pre-apartheid, and he was drafted into the Rhodesian army as part of the war where the Rhodesian government was attempting to suppress what they called guerrilla fighters, basically independence fighters, right? As part of the battle against apartheid. And so this is a guy who basically before the war began was defending the people who were now considered guerrilla fighters. He'd never held a gun before in his life. And he sent me this email to tell me this story, that he was deep in the forest one day, practicing with a small squad of soldiers when he detected movements up ahead. And he, with a pounding heart, he saw a long line of guerrilla fighters dressed in camouflage with carrying machine guns. And so instinctively, he raised his rifle, he flipped off the safety, he placed his finger on the trigger, he aimed at the leader of the group who was carrying an AK-47. And just as he was starting to pull the trigger, he felt a gentle hand on his back, on his shoulder. And one of his buddies said, whispered to him, "Don't shoot, it's just a boy." And so he lowered his rifle and looked at the screen and looked at the scene again and was astonished by what he saw, which was sure enough a boy who was 10 years old, leading a long line of cows. And the AK-47 was actually just a staff. And so for a number of years, this man struggled to understand what happened in this episode. And it really was a life-defining event for him. And he really didn't, he wondered what it meant about him that he had misperceived reality and almost shot a little boy. But actually, his brain was working exactly the way that brains work. There wasn't anything wrong with his brain. And there's a basic operating principle that explains what happened to this man. And it's the same operating principle that also helps us recognize cats and know when we should pet them and when we should keep our hands to ourselves. This operating principle explains how we experience and perceive emotions, and even how we create civilization. Very simply, this operating principle is your brain's ability to make and use concepts. Calculus is a set of concepts. Elements of the periodic table are concepts. Even an electron is a concept. In fact, everything you know in the form of concepts. And in this lecture, I'm going to show you that concepts are a key ingredient in constructing every action you take and every experience you have. And that concepts are tools that your brain uses for sensing and feeling and moving and living every single moment of your life. And concepts are so powerful that they actually create much of the reality that we live in. So in order to understand how this works, we have to take your brain's perspective for a moment. So for your entire life, your brain is trapped in a dark, silent box called your skull. Your brain is always receiving sensory signals, light waves, chemicals, changes in pressure, air pressure, and so on, that are detected and transduced by the sensory surfaces of your body, your retina, your cochlea, all the sensory surfaces of your body. And these signals are inherently ambiguous. Any given signal can have many, many different causes. So for example, let's say you hear a loud bang. If it was caused by a clap of thunder, you'd probably want to grab an umbrella or maybe a raincoat. If that loud bang was caused by a backfiring car, you'd probably want to hold your breath so you don't choke on the fumes. And if it's a gunshot, you probably want to run and duck for cover. And I should say, this is a much more meaningful example in the United States. Without knowing the cause of the bang, your brain doesn't know which action to prepare. So there's a lot of uncertainty. And uncertainty is metabolically costly, right? It's costly to prepare many action plans and hold them activated in your brain. So your brain really has to figure out what caused the incoming sensory signals to reduce this metabolic cost, to reduce the expense, to reduce uncertainty. And this is what philosophers and mathematicians and neuroscientists call an inverse problem. Actually, neuroscientists call this a reverse inverse problem. But basically the idea here is that you know the outcome and you have to figure out the cause. So your brain has to continuously solve an inverse problem. And the inverse problem isn't just for sensory signals coming from the world. The inverse problem also includes the sensory signals that are continually arriving from the sensory surfaces of your body regarding how much glucose is available, how much oxygen is available, how much salt is available, what's the stretch of your muscles, and so on and so forth. So for example, and this is an example that I used earlier today, imagine you have a tightness in your chest. Now, of course, you feel the tightness in your brain, right? Everything you experience is in your brain. Your body doesn't experience anything. You see in your brain, you hear in your brain. When you feel something, if you pinch yourself, the pinch you feel is actually in your brain. Pain is in your brain, and so on. But it's a combination or a dance, if you will, between the sensory signals arriving to the sensory surfaces and the signals in your brain. So your brain has to guess in order to act accordingly. So that tightness might be part of an instance of anxiety if you're waiting for test results in the doctor's office. It might be a feature of indigestion if you just ate a large meal. It also could be, as we discussed today, the beginnings of a heart attack as you lie awake in bed. Your brain doesn't know the cause of the tightness, it has to guess. And so basically the idea here, and this is an idea that we've integrated from a number of different literatures, is that the brain, your brain, my brain, really all brains solve its inverse problem by using past experiences, past events, to guess at the causes of incoming sensory events. Figuratively, metaphorically speaking, brains try to answer the question, which past events are similar to the present? Not what is this pattern of sensory signals, what does it mean? The question is really about similarity. What is this pattern of sensory signals similar to? And so in effect, what your brain is doing is it's reassembling, remembering events that are similar in some way to the present, so that it can consider past relationships between cause and effect to generalize to the present where the cause is not known and to make that guess. So your brain is guessing on the basis of similarity. Now in psychology, a group of things which are similar to each other is called a category. and a representation of a category is called a concept. So you could say that the brain, your brain, my brain, all brains are solving, all neurotypical brains are solving this inverse problem by continually constructing concepts. Or you could say that it's solving the inverse problem by continuing constructing categories. Because from a brain's perspective, concepts and categories are not different. So conventionally, in psychology, and really in common sense, we think about concepts as being in the head, categories are in the world, and that we have some kind of concept for a category that's in the world. But from the brain's perspective, this distinction is meaningless. The brain is constructing categories, or you could say it's constructing concepts. And the distinction between a category and a concept not only is dissolved, but so is the distinction between a category and an instance of the category. And the reason why is because in your brain, events begin as a category and end with an instance of that category. So concept construction or category construction happens really fast and really automatically. So most of the time we're just not aware of it. So I'm gonna slow things down and give you a constructed example of what's happening, and you are not allowed to say anything. Yeah, based on this morning. So how many of you have seen this example before in one of my talks? Okay, so your brain, it'll be our secret for now. So right now, your brain is searching through a lifetime of past experience, issuing thousands of guesses at once, weighing probabilities, trying to construct a concept or category to make sense of these blobs, to make sense of the light, frequency, wavelengths of light coming off this screen. If you don't see an object here, then your brain hasn't solved its inverse problem, and you're in a state that philosophers call experiential blindness. So your brain doesn't know which actions to prepare. And in fact, if I was scanning your brain right now while you were looking at this, your amygdala would be going crazy. Not because you're perceiving threat, but because there's uncertainty and novelty, and your brain can't make a good category. So now I'm gonna prepare to cure your blindness. I have to say, in the United States, this is like I don't know, do you have evangelical preachers here? In the United States, there are a lot of evangelical preachers who try to cure people, you know, with illness. So I like to get up on stage and say, would you like me to cure your blindness? Would you like me to cure your blindness?
Yeah.
I'm giving you a typical American evangelical.
We have to do the gospel dance.
Yeah. I'll just pass the hat around for you. See the light. I hope I don't mean to offend, I'm not trying to offend anybody, as evangelical Christians, my apologies, but. Okay, so. Yeah, so I'm gonna do this again for you so that.
I saw Homer Simpson hunting snowmen.
You know what? I do have an anecdote for this, but
That's fun.
so hopefully you can see the bee, the head of the bee, the antenna, the fuzzy, body of the bee, the wings, its fuzzy little tush there. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, many of you now see a bee or part of a bee. And the reason why is because now your brain can make a concept or category to fit this particular situation using the past experience that you didn't have before I showed you that color photograph. And so what's interesting is that there actually is no bee on this screen. The signals in your brain combined with the signals on the screen, from the screen that are hitting your retina, are entwined, are constraining each other to basically construct the image of a bee where there is no bee. Nothing on this screen has changed. from the time that you saw this before. The only thing that's changed is you. So I have to say that I've used this, I have several, these are called Mooney images. They're Mooney illusions actually, and we use them in research. And I was using this example, and a woman came up to me after one of my talks and she said, what is wrong with my brain? Because I don't see a bee, I see a bunny rabbit. And then she proceeded to draw the shape of a bunny rabbit and instead of a bee. And I said, well, so it turns out that she owns a pet store and she spends a lot of time around bunny rabbits. And so I said, well, you know, your brain is working, there's nothing wrong with your brain. Your brain's working exactly the way that it should. It's just that and of course, I'm not going to use Bayesian language with her, right? But basically I say, well, you know, your brain is it's much more, it's easier for your brain to construct the image of a bunny. You're constructing a concept for a bunny, an embodied concept for a bunny. You know, I only showed you the bee once, so you know it probably can't compete. But she really saw a bunny, and I think this just makes the general point that I'm going to really hit home again and again and again today. That our experience of things in the world, events and objects in the world, are really a combination of the signals in the world that hit the sensory surfaces of our bodies and the signals in our brain. So solving this inverse problem with concepts and categories is not only important for experiencing bees and other objects, it's actually part of pretty much everything that you do. If you couldn't generalize from past experience, then the world and even the nature of your own body would be a blooming, buzzing confusion, to use the words of William James. You'd be faced with uncertainty all the time, which is metabolically expensive and potentially dangerous. So instead, your brain can create a large vocabulary of concepts very flexibly that are tailored to specific situations that you're in, which you benefit from very concretely. So, for example, research shows that if you can flexibly make emotion concepts, something that we call emotional granularity, then you will be actually healthier, both metabolically, mentally, and physically. So adolescents and adults who are higher in emotional granularity, they can make a greater number of emotion concepts, even negative emotions, like for unpleasant emotions. They cope with stress in a more agile way. During stressful events, they are less likely to rely on alcohol. They are more likely to resolve conflicts without aggression, without physical violence. And they're less likely to develop stress-related illnesses. And they're more actually likely to recover more quickly from even certain serious illnesses. So when these findings first emerged, I thought, really? Concepts? How could we were doing research at that time on embodied concepts, the idea that concepts are not these rule-based abstract propositional things. They're implemented in the brain as sensory motor patterns. But I didn't really understand why would you be physically healthier because your brain could make very precise emotion concepts? This didn't really make a lot of sense to me until I realized that it took me a long time, so I didn't want to answer the question. I didn't even pretend to answer the question because I didn't really know, and I want to keep an open mind. But I think the answer is that concepts are first and foremost, and we'll talk about this tomorrow in tomorrow's lecture in a much more neuroscientifically based way. Concepts in your brain are first and foremost tools for planning action. And the more specifically you can plan a specific action in a specific situation, the more you've reduced uncertainty, and that's metabolically advantageous. And if these, it's the metabolic advantage is very small. just like if you couldn't make a precise concept, the metabolic cost would be very small. And with metabolism, things, really small savings and really small costs just take a lot, they add up over time. So this is why, you know, kids, for example, who are very low in emotional granularity in childhood, which often goes with adverse childhood experiences, end up showing metabolically related illnesses like depression, anxiety, diabetes, heart disease, 10, 20, sometimes 30 years later. But there's a very, very regular relationship between adversity in childhood and metabolic illness in early to middle adulthood. And recent research suggests that emotional granularity is a mediator of this effect. So, and it's a small mediator, right? So it's not accounting for everything, but it's accounting for some reasonable amount of variance, a significant amount of variance, even though it's not a huge effect. It's still surprising to me that there would be an effect at all. So making concepts that tailor your actions and your experience to specific situations is the key to efficient energy regulation. And efficient energy regulation, whether you know it or not, whether you realize it or not, is a major pressure. It's actually a major selection pressure for our species, but it's also a major determinant of your physical and mental health. And so it actually turns out that these small metabolic savings even allow kids who learn a broader vocabulary of concepts for emotion actually perform better in school. They perform better on standardized tests for mathematics, even when you control just the size of their vocabulary more generally, because they're tools for regulation. So the point that I'm making here is that every experience you have, every action that you take is created from a combination, an ensemble, if you will, of signals that are outside your brain, the sensory present, right, outside your brain, and signals that create concepts or categories inside your brain. And this, the proportion of these two ingredients shifts on a moment-to-moment basis. So now we have the tools to understand what happened to our Rhodesian friend when he saw those heavily armed gorilla fighters instead of a young boy with cows. Because his brain initially solved its inverse problem incorrectly based on his general concept of war and also that particular war, what he knew about that particular war, and being deep in the woods and being with his comrades in a risky situation, holding a gun. His heart was pounding, something was moving up ahead, holding something pointy. His brain took a guess. And that guess prepared him to start taking actions, like he started to pull the trigger. Right? So the guess was a very specific concept in that particular situation. The guess didn't match the incoming signals coming from the sensory surfaces of his body, but his brain ignored those signals. And he literally saw a gorilla with an AK-47 until he blinked and looked again. Now, I could talk to you, I could put all of this in predictive processing terms, and we'll talk about that in that language tomorrow. But today is a public lecture, and so I'm not going to get into the specifics of the dynamics. Basically, the point is that this guy was preparing to shoot, and that action preparation was linked to what he saw. And this dynamic is super important in the United States, where there is a real problem with police officers shooting unarmed Black civilians. I'm not talking about cases where officers shoot someone in the back when they're running away. I'm talking about the situation where a police officer has drawn their gun, and if the assailant, if the person they're chasing, or is the person they're interacting with, actually has a gun, that police officer can't wait to consciously register the gun, because if they do, they'll be dead. So they're really going on the basis of the concepts and categories, the embodied concepts and categories that they make based on their past experience. And this is a past experience that's not just informed by your own personal experience. It's also informed by the books that you read and the movies that you see and the stuff you hear about on social media and so on and so forth. So while this is a hypothetical situation, well, I mean, I'm relaying an actual real story. In the lives of Americans right now, in the United States, this is a really serious problem. And it also holds the potential for an answer. So I'm using the words concept and category, and I'm using them kind of fluidly and kind of loosely. So I want to just dig into the details a little bit about what we're to get a little formal about what we're talking about here. Conventionally, a category is a group of things that are similar enough that we can treat them interchangeably or as if they're equivalent, like this category of cats. By the way, the reason why I chose cats originally was because get it, category, get it? This was like my husband's suggestion. It was like neuroscience jokes for him. So my husband who's watching, sweetie, there, I did it, they laughed. Cats are similar in various ways, right? They have whiskers, they have pointy ears, they purr. This is a list of features that cats share. And for many years, scientists and philosophers believed that this mental list of features was how you knew what a cat was. Does it have whiskers? Check. Does it have pointy ears? Check. Does it purr when you pet it? Check. Right? This is how you know that something is a cat. And this list was thought to be the concept that was stored in your head like a file, and that you would retrieve whenever you encountered a creature that you needed to figure out what it was. So you would use your list, your your concept to categorize the cat and then know what to do about it. So what do you do with a cat? But if you think about it, cats vary in a lot of ways. Some cats are large, other cats are small. Cats vary in their eye color, they vary in their fur color and their fur thickness and whether they even have fur. So this simple list of enduring unchangeable features, like a natural kind category, doesn't really work for cats. And as we talked about earlier today, this doesn't really work for any biological category. This was Darwin's great observation. In the real world, your brain creates concepts that are not defined by mere physical similarities, but by something else. Your brain is using function, similarity on the basis of function. So categories don't exist in the world. Your brain makes them in a given situation by reassembling past events that are functionally similar to the present situation. So if I ask you, for example, to think of a cat and you're in a pet store, you will construct a concept, an embodied concept, a sensory motor concept for a cat with features that would make a good pet. If I asked you to think about a cat in a zoo, your brain might make a very different concept or category for a cat. And if you've seen a mouse in your kitchen, then your brain conjures a cat with features that are good at catching mice. And if I ask you to think about someone who's cool and hip, like a smooth operator, if you're a movie buff, you might conjure an image of this character. Does anyone know who this is?
Boss dude.
The dude from The Big Lebowski, right, Jeff Bridges. This should be easy.
Yeah.
Bogart, right, this is Rick Blaine, played by Humphrey Bogart in Casablanca, or the girl with the dragon tattoo. This is Lisbeth Salander. Heck, even a dog can be a cat. So let me introduce you to Luna Barrett, our dog, who is really a cat. She's aloof, she's affectionate, occasionally when she wants something. So she's really a cat in dog clothing. So I want you to notice that the various instances of cats here are physically different from one another. Their features vary with the function that they are serving in a specific situation. So a category like cat, even though it seems like it's a concrete category based on concrete endurable features, actually is what we would call, what I have been calling it basically a concept or category, a conceptual category. Basically, it's a functional category that the similarity is based on the function that the instances serve for you in a specific situation. And this kind of a category is not static in your brain, right? It changes with the situation. So it's what Larry Barcelow, the cognitive scientist, calls an ad hoc category. It's formed instantaneously based on past experiences because the function of cat depends on the requirements of the situation. And the most important similarity of a cat is about its function in a given situation, not its physical looks. And so the idea here is that every category works this way. Even categories that we sort of think of as being in the world, concrete, natural kinds, don't change. It turns out that there's a lot of evidence that this is how categories work. So when I show you this carefully constructed inverse problem, maybe you see a cat because your brain just made a bunch of concepts for cats a moment ago. And this in psychology is what we call priming, when we prompt the brains to automatically construct a specific category. Of course, there is no cat here. And if I told you that this is supposed to be an apple with a leaf on its stem, you know, the kind of, maybe it's a red apple, maybe it crunches when you bite into it, maybe it's, you know, sweet tasting with a little tart, sort of lingering after flavor, then maybe you would see an apple. Either way, your brain is using past events to construct a concept to make sense of these sweeping lines. And with this concept, your brain is literally changing the firing of its own neurons to prepare you or itself to take your next action, whether it's to pet this thing or to eat it. The ability to make conceptual categories gives us the capacity to see things, not in terms of their physical constitution, but in terms of the functions that we impose on them. Conceptual categories let you consider objects that look nothing alike, like a bottle of wine, a bouquet of flowers, and a fancy wristwatch, and understand them all as gifts that celebrate an achievement. Your brain is actually compressing away in the architecture of the cerebral cortex. The neural arrangement, the architecture, the way that the neurons are wired together compress away the physical differences of these objects, and in the process, you understand that they have a similar function, and you can act on them as if they have a similar function. A conceptual category also allows you to impose multiple functions on exactly the same physical object. So a cup of wine might mean one thing when your friends shout congratulations, or when you're given the honor of an award. And a cup of wine, the same cup of wine could mean something else completely when a priest intones blood of Christ. Right? So the capacity to make conceptual categories, to go beyond the physical, to create functional similarities that we impose, is something that, as far as we know, only human brains can do. And human brains do this in collaboration with each other. So when a human brain, surrounded by a chorus of other human brains, makes something up, and then we teach each other about and communicate about this thing that we've made up and imposed on something that is physical, that made up function becomes real. Not always, but often, right? So we could all agree that glass is food. That won't make glass food, right? But we could all agree that a little piece of paper is money, or is an award, or is a degree, and then it becomes that because we all treat it that way, because we all impose that function on the piece of paper. And with the help of conceptual categories, humans create complex cultures that have allowed us to colonize pretty much every habitat on Earth and survive and thrive in more climates than pretty much any other animal on Earth, except maybe bacteria, which can live in very harsh environments like outer space and your gut, your intestines. Conceptual categories also are the basis of civilization. That this is what allows us to create civilizations and live in civilizations, and really shape the evolution of our own species with the rules of civilization that we follow in a way that no other animal can do. So what do these four things have in common? Does anyone know what these four things have in common? Rocks, salt, barley, tulips. Well, at various times in human history, they've all served as currency. So humans have collectively imposed a function of value on these objects, and then poof, they have value, and they became money. Money is real, of course, but it's a special kind of real. It's the kind of real that you only get with conceptual categories called social reality. Conceptual categories are we wouldn't have social reality without these kinds of categories. To create social reality, we just create a concept like value, right? So that idea that something can be traded for material goods, then we communicate that idea efficiently to the other brains around us. And then we give it a name, like money. And then by our collective actions, we impose the function on physical reality, like little pieces of paper, or metal discs, or salt, or barley, or tulips, or big rocks in the ocean that can't be moved, or something completely imaginary, well, maybe not completely, but mathematical algorithms like Bitcoin, right? These don't have functions by virtue of their physical nature. They have functions because we all agree that they serve that function, whatever the thing is. And so money becomes real only because we all agree that it's real. And if we withdraw that agreement, money disappears and we're left just with pieces of paper or metal discs or, tulip bulbs, right? And, the tulip craze in Holland in the 17th century was because people were trading tulips as currency. And then a group of people decided that the tulips didn't have value anymore, and so they didn't. This is the explanation for stock market crashes as well in the 20th century. Concepts even allow us to impose functions on things that are completely invisible, like the empty space above a building, which is called air rights. Humans have imposed a function on this empty space, and then we sell it and buy it. So humans sell the empty space above a building to another human who pays a lot of money for that right, then they own the empty space. There's nothing in physics or chemistry that determines the specific arc of the Earth's orbit around the sun and naming it January. This is a social reality which is made up, and then it's maintained by people like us. You live in a city whose name and whose borders are made up and maintained by people, including you. Your street address is spelled with letters and other symbols that were also made up by people and are maintained by people like you. Some of you may have acquired a place to live with something called a mortgage, which is completely made up and which has value right now. How many of you have a mortgage? Wow. Okay, well, this would be a more meaningful example if you did have a mortgage, because in the Great Recession of 2008, which in the United States, a bunch of guys in fancy suits decided that a bunch of mortgages no longer had value, and then they didn't, and this plunged people into financial catastrophe, like billions of people. But it also disrupted the world economy. So concepts of social reality add meaning over and above physical reality. So here's an example. Chimpanzees can invent tools like poking a stick into a termite hole to pull out tasty snacks, termites. They can observe each other. They can copy each other's behavior. This is creative. They can communicate with each other. This learning that they do, all of this is based in physical reality, namely that the stick fits into the termite hole for them to fish out the termites with. This is not social reality. But if a troop of chimps agreed that whosoever pulls a particular stick out of the ground or a rock becomes king of the jungle, that is social reality, because it imposes a sovereign function on the stick that goes beyond the physical. Some things that we assume are inherent in physical reality are actually created with the concepts, with conceptual concepts of social reality. An example is emotion. Each of you inherited, culturally inherited, emotion concepts from your culture. And cultural inheritance is a biological process. It's the process by which concepts and behaviors and so on are transmitted from one generation to the other without genes, right? So genes are not the only means of transmitting knowledge or actions from one generation to the other. Cultural inheritance is a form of inheritance that evolutionary biologists study when they take an extended evolutionary approach. And by virtue of how people spoke to you and the actions that they performed on you or in your presence, you developed a set of emotion categories, emotion concepts that allow a single feature like the raise of a lip, the curl of a lip or the raise of an eyebrow or the tilt of a head to become expressions of emotion in your culture, taking on different emotional meanings in different situations. This is social reality. Emotion concepts are basically conceptual categories. They allow your brain to make instances of happiness that look and feel very different depending on the situation that you're in. Same thing is true for color. Wavelengths of light exist as a continuum in the physical world, but people within a culture have concepts to draw lines in that continuum to experience discrete colors. So the wavelengths of light between the boundaries are acted on as if they are similar, they're equivalent for the purposes of action in a particular situation. No English-speaking human with 3 cones in their retinas would confuse, for example, blue and purple, But these wavelengths of light are part of the same color category in other cultures. Basically, different cultures have different concepts, so they draw different lines in this, what is essentially a set of continuous signals. And this same, way of drawing lines in the sand, so to speak, creates reality in other ways. So for example, concepts draw lines in the sand to make a country like Yugoslavia and then erase that country and make new countries in its place. And by virtue of these shifting lines, you change a group of people from citizens to immigrants. And all of the physical consequences that entails. So the social reality, our ability to impose a function collectively on something physical that doesn't by its nature have that function, but we all agree that it does, and so then it takes on that function. This has profound physical consequences for people's lives, based on stuff we make up and agree on and then give a name to. You actively and willingly participate in this made-up world every day. In fact, we're all doing it right now, right? This is as real to you as, say, your own name, which, by the way, is also a concept in social reality. It's also a conceptual category. You and I, and everyone in this room, we are creating and maintaining certain concepts of social reality right now in collaboration with each other, even without trying, because we have human brains. So social reality is it's the ability to make conceptual categories and create, sort of add to reality is an incredible gift. We simply can make up stuff, invent different concepts and customs as laws, invent different concepts as customs and laws. And if other people treat them as real, then they become real. Democracy is a system of concepts in social reality. The act of voting for a leader by making and tallying little marks on pieces of paper is meaningful only because we give it that meaning and we agree on that meaning. And if that agreement disappeared for whatever reason, because we willingly give it away or because we were forced to give it away, then democracy ceases to exist, right? A president only has power because we all agree that there's a role called president, which has certain powers. And if we didn't agree, he wouldn't have that power unless he tried or she tried to take it by physical means, right? Most of the things that we consider as part of our everyday life as reality, or just say many things, are function in this way, right? So social reality is constrained, as I said, by physical reality. We could all agree that we could walk through walls or that we could fly without wings. That won't happen, that's not real, we can't make that real. But we make a lot of other things real just by virtue of our collective agreement, our collective intentionality towards particular objects. You uphold the concepts of social reality every time you treat a sparkling diamond as having a value, every time you idolize a celebrity, every time you use certain pronouns or refuse to use those pronouns. The ability to create concepts that go beyond the physical is a superpower, really, of the human brain in conjunction with other human brains. And in the words of this great philosopher of the 20th century, with great power comes great responsibility. Right? A superpower works best when you know you have it. So with that, I will thank you for your attention. And I'll just sort of put this up as the takeaways that in every moment, now as in every moment of your life, through electricity and swirling chemicals, your brain is constructing conceptual categories, or just concepts. they're, from the perspective of the brain, as I said, categories and concepts are interchangeable. These concepts control your body and create your experiences, and in the process, ultimately create much of the reality that you live in. Concepts can turn people into cats, a racing heart into happiness or fear, tulips into currency, and a person into a president or an immigrant. So concepts are tools for living. And through concepts, we have more control over reality than we might think, and maybe more responsibility for reality than we might realize. For a fuller discussion of these ideas and the science behind them, you can have a look at this book. And this is, by the way, an example of social reality right there. That was funny. You need to laugh at my jokes. That's the way it works. Yeah, even if they're bad. So you can look at these books, or you can go to my website where there are many articles and talks for free available to you. And with that, I'll just thank you for your attention.